This was really the voices of our students saying, yeah, there's systemic racism that's happening in our schools. There's a lot of discrimination. Some students and staff don't feel comfortable in the spaces. So it was an awakening for us as a public institution to say, okay, we know the work around truth and reconciliation, which is, again, coming together in that awakening to say, what responsibility do we have as leaders of public education to do something about this? And so that's where, amongst those recommendations that came out of those listening circles, is they wanted an intentional department to lead the district in what's our next steps? Where do we go from here? Like, how do we handle these really tough conversations that can seem super, super accusational and the history that's tied to it? So that's where it came from. And then
Mhm.
in Surrey, and of course, other districts are doing the same thing, right? We're not insulated in that. So there's leaders across the province where you see this coming together. How do we pull this all together in the work that we want to do for our kids?
I have been extremely blessed with the network that I've been able to forge over the last number of years. And oftentimes, the greatest connections I have with people is finding out our interests outside the classroom. And in fact, I have another podcast I have 2 seasons of called Outside the Classrooms, where I interviewed people that I know that have an unusual or just a really strong passion for something outside of the classroom. Oftentimes, that's just the way we connect and the way we forge lasting connections and relationships. And that's really true of today's guest. JB Mahli is the Director of Instruction of Racial Equity in the Surrey School District in Surrey, British Columbia. And I got to know JB, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago. And I found out he has had this past life where he was the ball boy for the now defunct Vancouver Grizzlies, which are now the Memphis Grizzlies of the NBA, and really was fascinated during a couple of our times together and with his stories of interactions with big time athletes. And even in this conversation, you're going to hear references to Shaquille O'Neal and Michael Jordan, among others. And JB looked at that as a very important time in his life that helped him shape himself even as a leader. And so we dive into that amongst other things and really trying to understand what does a role of racial equity and diversity look like, and why do we need it, and what he's been able to do thus far in his tenure in that position. If you like basketball, you'll really like this episode. And even if you don't, I think just finding out a little bit more about what it means to be focused and have an intention around racial equity, I think you're going to find this conversation very interesting. And I hope you enjoy today's episode with JB Mahli. So JB, I think back to the first time that we got to know each other and connected, and you had me hooked with your tales, if you will, of your time was it a Grizzly ball boy? Was that your role? Or you were doing
Yeah.
training? I don't even, just remind me of your early days with the Vancouver Grizzlies.
Yeah. So I just had the unique opportunity to join the team as it started here in Vancouver as a ball boy for them. I was still in high school at the time. Grade 11, I think, was when the training camp was happening, like 96. So just starting the 97 year. So yeah, I was a ball boy for them for pretty much their entire time here. And then for the last little part, I had a chance to help with the equipment manager team, be one of the equipment managers for them. And so just an awesome opportunity to be around, really a dream of mine. And yeah, I was on the court with the players in the back locker room supporting them and the management and team. And so lived out my dream of professional sports and basketball, especially with Michael Jordan, of course. Everyone idolized Jordan, and having a chance that was my goal as a kid, to meet Michael Jordan. And so that was the path I took, and had a chance to throw the ball to him and rebound for him and try to have a conversation where wasn't peeing my pants at the same time. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, and didn't you not even have a chance to, when they made the move to Memphis, wasn't there an opportunity for you to join it as well?
Yeah. So again, like the training staff there was incredible, right? Along the way, just helping to keep you a part of the team, even though you're a ball boy or equipment manager. And so the team moved to Memphis, and they had a chance to shift over some of the staff that really wanted to stay there. Many of them did. And Memphis is just a completely different, obviously, town, different culture, different community. Vancouver, very different. So the diversity there was just incredible. But it was a long journey. And when I got to that point, my dad turned to me and said, okay, look, you've had your fun now. Go back, let's finish some school and get a career going. Although I wish now I knew what I knew now back then and how to make a career out of something that was a passion back then too, and how to navigate that world because I was pretty young. But
Yeah.
Memphis, yeah, it was pretty cool to visit there and get the team set up and then, yeah, go from there.
So we're going to jump into your current work and so forth. But even when you look back at that time and you think about people that you saw, coaches and players and other leaders in that organization, is there something you look back on and you're almost, I don't know if you can what I'd say applying to today, but you think about in terms of what did you, if anything, did you
Yeah.
learn about leadership during that time?
I learned so much. Like I learned an incredibly large amount that I've over time reflected. And there's moments that just come up. They're like, wow, like either it was a comment someone said, or it was an action that someone did, or you're included in a conversation. And I think they've all stayed with me as a person, as a human being, as a leader. A couple that jump to mind is sitting in the locker room with Shaquille O'Neal, and he was with Orlando at that point, very young. And he's looking at me and I'm staring at him across, maybe he wanted some help with something and he kind of signals me over and I sit with him and he goes, can I just ask you a question? And I go, sure. And it was like weird because it's like, oh, you don't need anything. You just want to talk. And so I sat down beside him and he goes, can I just ask you a weird question? I said, sure. He goes, what are you? And I didn't know how to answer him. Like, you mean like, where am I from? And he goes, yeah, what are you? Like, what is your background? And it was just, it was a very caring way that he said it. Although like now I think about it, it's probably a different way of asking, but it didn't matter at that point.
Right.
And I go, cool. I go, yeah, both my parents were born in India and I'm first immigrant Canadian, and I'm Sikh, right? My parents are from Northern India and Punjab, and my religion is a Sikh. And he's cool. And he goes, you're one of the first Sikh people that I've met. And I'm like, cool. But it was just this is Shaquille O'Neal we're talking about, right? And
Right.
having a conversation where he's inviting me just to sit with him,
Right.
ask me that was one example that just stands out.
Because he didn't have to do that.
Did
Right.
not have to do that. And he took time out, like we're talking about 40 minutes before they go out for shoot around. And I'm just standing there. He's putting his socks on and tying his shoes. And so it's just inviting people when they don't have to. That has been like a common thread. Even out for lunch, the general manager happened on two occasions where I was a kid. I never got invited to any fancy dinners. Like my parents, we never went to a restaurant, like never happened. My dad was a welder by trade. My mom worked in a factory. Like dinner out was pizza, and pick it up and bring it back home on one Friday a month. So to be invited to a restaurant by a general manager, I would sit beside them and I'd watch what they would do and their interactions that they would have. And those little nuances sit with me today all the time as a leader, like who's at the table, who's not at the table. And even how he paid the bill, he wrote everyone's name on the back of the receipt. I'm like, what is he doing? And I understand there's responsibilities that he has to do the business part of it that he did sneakily on the side. But man, those conversations, I remember the people, what they're wearing. I remember their facial expressions. I remember everything. So some of my most fondest moments as a kid growing up, very fortunate to have those experiences, but they've definitely molded me into the leader that I am for sure today.
So let's transition there. You're
Mm.
now your title is officially diversity, equity, and inclusion. And is it
It's a
what is it?
handful, right?
Yeah.
It's so the
What title?
official title is Director of Instruction, and
Yeah.
then with the racial equity portfolio. And so it has that systems piece as a DOI, we call it Director of Instruction as a team, but racial equity is my portfolio.
So how long has that position been in Surrey?
So the position, I was hired in January 2023 when this department was created, but the work goes way before I came into that position.
Right.
So all the way back to 2020 and a little bit before that. But the department that I get to start from the grassroots with our assistant superintendent partner that I have, Leader Dylan, and the team is around racial equity. Fairly new, but it came out of not the work, but it came out of the time, I should say, around 2020, 2019.
And talk about that specifically, because was there a seminal moment? Listen, we all know like racial equity is not just something we've decided to pay attention to now, although hopefully maybe we're paying more attention to it. We have, But was there some kind of moment in the district where that sort of decided, hey, we need to do something, or
Yeah.
just something that generally was building in society?
Yeah, I think you're right. To me, I look back and I think of it as an awakening for our leadership, for our parents, our teachers, our students. It was really around that COVID time where around the world, you had a huge rise of anti-Asian racism. And again, not new, but just came to a confluence with that. You had Black Lives Matter, the movement around George Floyd when he was murdered in the spring, or I think it was May of 2020. Interesting enough, George Floyd, his twin, that was his family closest friend, was Steven Jackson, a basketball player, played in the NBA. Steven Jackson had a 10-day contract when I was a young kid here with the Vancouver Grizzlies. Yeah, because he's best friends with Mike Bibby. So I met him. So for me, it was a snap of a finger,
Connected.
personally connection, right? So
Right.
that's with me personally, but again, globally, massive movement. So our district, again, kudos to our leadership, right? At that time, Jordan Tinney, our team of our board members, our senior leadership, they got a sense of there was this awakening happening in society. If you go into our schools, this incredible diversity in leadership and students, our families. So they wanted to tap in to see, okay, is there a connection between what's happening in society and what's going on in our schools? What is there a common connection or understanding? And sure enough, we did I think it was about 39 listening circles with an organization around finding out what equity looked like. And this was really the voices of our students saying, yeah, there's systemic racism that's happening in our schools. There's a lot of discrimination. Some students and staff don't feel comfortable in the spaces. So it was an awakening for us as a public institution to say, okay, we know the work around truth and reconciliation, which is, again, coming together in that awakening to say, what responsibility do we have as leaders of public education to do something about this? And so that's where, amongst those recommendations that came out of those listening circles, is they wanted an intentional department to lead the district in what's our next steps? Where do we go from here? Like, how do we handle these really tough conversations that can seem super, super accusational and the history that's tied to it? So that's where it came from. And then
Hmm.
in Surrey, and of course, other districts were doing the same thing, right? We're not insulated in that. So there's leaders across the province where you see this coming together. How do we pull this all together in the work that we want to do for our kids?
And so since that time, what are the sort of programs and or structures that are put in place? I'm sure
Yeah.
there's obviously the continuing kind of literacy and awareness that's an ongoing, but are there other kind of like really specific things that have been done to address the issue?
Yeah, no, it's a good question because I think the last thing at that time I was in a school as a principal at North Surrey Secondary. Loved that job. I love being in schools. And it's funny with my wife, I would say there's very little that will pull me out of a school where I get to be with kids all day, where you don't necessarily get to be with kids all day. And so what we wanted to do to leave that position to come into this position is really emulate what we do in schools around learning, proactive, reactive, and then what are our guidelines or guideposts around policies that we have. So now to be able to do that with our leaders in our district together to say, okay, let's create a framework of how do we see into this. So what we've been able to do is just last June, the previous June 2023, we created a racial equity, a 5-year plan. And this plan is really around what are our priorities, what are our goals, and how do we do this work? And so those four priorities, it's a wholesome plan, but when we look at it, the four priorities are we need to really leverage racial equity initiatives around our district. That includes student voice. Do we collect data, right? What does our data programs look like around the diversity that we have? What does it look like around Indigenous student success for everyone? So that was like one priority. Another priority we have is around professional learning. Like this, it can't be a one hit pro D type of come on in and here you go and off you go. This is a journey that we're invested in with all of our staff and leaders, is how do we bring people together in spaces to talk about topics and a variety of different topics. So that's priority number 2. Priority 3 is curriculum. We need a curriculum that's culturally responsive, that understands that the students that we have in our classes, teachers as well, they hold a lot of trauma from their lived experiences. So before I jump into a topic as a social studies teacher, let's just say on the birth of Canada or colonialism or pre-calculus, like how do we tend to the why and the connection between who's in the room before we jump to those topics, and we do that social emotional learning piece. So that's priority number 3. And then priority number 4 is responding to all forms of racism. is really getting the uncomfortable part out of the way. And if we hear a slur or some language in our school, we stop it, we name it, and we support it through restorative practices. Because we want to teach our students that this is a safe and caring space, but we also want you to get ready for the world outside of our schools, where you're going to have to often, unfortunately, hear difficult language. But how do you call in and call out? So what are those tools that we develop? So those are the 4 priorities, right? Everything's got to fit into that 4. And the work around who does that work is where really we have to empower our kids. So that's the plan. I think right now, the biggest, I think, success we could see is just this last June, our board passed a racial equity policy around this work that I just explained. So anybody can look it up. It's there, it's guided there. And so that will outlive me. It'll continue. The journey will continue with different people doing that work, but the work continues. So I think that's in a very short time, but also a very long time, we've come a long way.
Right. What I like about the way you shared it too, and I think this is the advantage that we have at schools, it's an opportunity to learn and it allows us to make mistakes, right? And so this idea that calling something out, not to, because I think in the society that we live in, the immediate reaction is something happens and now we're looking at, okay, how hard should we punish people? Instead of saying, wait, is there a chance to teach here? What can we learn from this? So schools should be that place where a kid gets to screw up and it doesn't have to determine their life
Absolutely.
because they made. And so how do we learn with and from each other? And again, I know having talked to Mark Permain and everything else, everyone celebrates Surrey's diversity. Like it's one of the things that we brag about. Like we got all these different people from all these different places and spaces and perspectives, and that should be a strength. And it is,
It is.
right?
Yeah,
It's bringing diverse people together inherently is challenging, no matter what the diversity is, because
totally.
that means you're not the same. That's what that means, and
That's
that should be good, but it's also, yeah, but you're not the same.
yeah. And that's our goal is you're exactly right, where we want to celebrate the differences, right? That's how we start to appreciate, we build our cultural competency in doing that way, right? If I stayed with you for a week and you stayed with me for a week, imagine the cultural diversity that we would be
Yeah.
able to build and the humility. So you're right. That's the work, right? Is we need to spend more time in spaces. Classrooms are the perfect environment where we get to tinker, but we also need to be aware of what's everyone bringing to us, because I'm very fortunate and my kids are even more fortunate and privileged to come to school the way they do and they show up, but we know that's not the norm.
This episode is brought to you by Advanced Learning Partnerships, also known as ALP. We are a professional learning consulting group that serves communities across North America. We are partners, designers, and agents for change. You can learn more about the work we do at alplearn.com. And now back to the show. The shack example you gave earlier is the curiosity that just says, yeah, we get to be curious about. Tell me, not to ask people where are you from, and that kind of, like you said, there's maybe a better way to do it, but the inherently, okay, this person's curious, and we want to foster that. I'm not here I just want to understand
Yeah.
a little bit more about you. So when you think about your whole journey as a high school teacher and a principal and now district principal, and you think about all the leadership challenges that you have, and obviously you're super reflective already, but is there one challenge that goes, yeah, that one really shaped me and taught me something really important? Do you have one of those memories of a challenge that you can share?
Yeah. I think for me as a leader, the one that sticks to mind is more around, so as a leader, we show up to do the service of education. And I think what's the most challenging right now is with that diversity, that we have students that come to us with wants and needs of how they view their belonging and their advocacy in schools. And I think that is something that has changed every single year I've been in a school as a leader, is how do I help create spaces in schools where students can learn and build their competency about each other, right? There's so many things happening in the world right now where kids want to talk about it and they want to talk about
Right.
these things in school. So as a leader, how do you create spaces in schools where you still have your district vision as guideposts as public education, but you still have that opportunity to teach kids about competencies, right?
Right.
What does criticality look like when we're talking about oppression around the world? And that, I think, is the biggest leadership challenge, that without being exclusionary, we want to be inclusive and not singling out different people and so on and so forth. There's so much conflict in this world. And I think years past, that conflict was always over there. And we have kids now in our buildings many of them sitting that came from wherever there is. And so they want to be able to be in spaces where they can talk about it in safe and caring ways, because we want to educate them. We have to attend to that in a way. So I think that has been and is the biggest challenge for me is as a leader, how do we make sure kids know that we care about them, but we also have a learning agenda that we need to continue to go towards. So it's a regular conversation with our teams here is how do we build those conversations with vice principals and principals? Because the other part too is we by very nature, we're with kids all days. And so I think
Right.
education is very different. We don't have mechanisms where I don't know, you go to any organization, they can pull their staff and have really good, rich conversations. But our main mandate is to be with kids all day. So how do we reskill and reshape spaces for reskilling our employees and our leaders to do this work? There's no teacher college that's going to get you ready for all of this stuff as you come out, right? You got to be
That's
able to
right.
committed to this work.
I think there's a trend, and I think the evidence shows that we're in a bit of a leadership crisis in that there are fewer teachers wanting to step up and say, I think I want to take a leadership role, because it's a hard job. It just really is. And I that continues to be difficult. But when you identify a young teacher who may be showing some interests and or signs that they want to get into more leadership opportunities, what advice would you give them to get them on the right path thinking about this?
It's a great question. I think the leaders that we have so many different diverse people in our districts that we have to really be conscious as people looking for those talents is to really understand what our bias is, what we're looking for. It may not be that traditional or a particular person that you see as a leader. Their identity, their intersectionality, the way they work with kids may be looking completely different. So I think we need to be aware of that. I'm always looking for people that are master teachers. They have that relationship with how to nurture learning in a classroom, how to connect kids with the why of what they're doing. I think that's critical. And we want staff that are those natural mentors, coaches. Those are the leaders that we need, right? Like we need the people that understand that. One of my mentors a long time ago used to say, there's a certain withedness that comes with leadership. You're just in that space. You can feel the synergy and they have that withedness quality. And I think that's the one where I would say anybody that feels like they're connected with kids and they want to go to the next level and say, I want to look at systems to do that. You're ready for leadership, right? You need to
Right.
seek out a mentor. You need to talk about that more, get some perspective taking, go for a walk, do anything. But that's the advice I would give.
That's awesome. And growing, working in Surrey, there's full of amazing mentors. And I know you've mentioned a few folks in that, but I'm always pushing people to use their gratitude chops as much as they can. So that's my question is who's the one person that you are grateful for? And again, it could be somebody that maybe others don't know or whatever. I'd love it if it was somebody that could get a little shout out. But when you look back,
Yeah.
tons of people, sure. But can you name one?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think at every point in my life, as I went through elementary, I think I added a new mentor or a new person to gain from. The one that sticks out to me, I think the most, his name was John Westlake. He was my grade 9 humanities teacher. And he was the type of person where I look back and I don't know if he knew, but the way he was connecting with me was really at a level of a way that facilitating space. Like he would come by and just have conversations with me at all points of time. And sometimes it was about the silliest things. Sometimes it was more about writing, like, hey, JB, your structure is a little bit off here. I would go to bat for him anytime. He came out, watched some of our volleyball games as I was playing on the volleyball team. And then I went to him because I needed a teacher reference for the Grizzlies position. And everything hinged on this one reference. And so I went to him and I said, would you be willing to do this? And he goes, I'll take a look at it. And he said that he sent it in. To this day, he'll never let me know what he said or what he didn't say, or if he communicated to them. But I know that I got that job probably because of something that he said. And I don't know what that was. But that's to me who was a role model mentor for me. And I think the life lessons that this person was all about service. And my background being a Sikh and South Asian, the service is part of who I am. And I see him as a continuity for me as I go throughout my career. And him not being South Asian was even more fascinating, right? And I think that
Yeah.
there's a lot that I could take from him and with me. And he was a teacher in the Delta School District at Burnsview junior secondary, and he's retired now and hopefully on a boat somewhere in the sun. But yeah, that definitely he's the one person that's definitely stuck with me for a very long time.
Well, that phrase you used about like you go to bat for this person, like that idea of, and we've all, if those of us who play sports, there's these coaches that will do anything for them, right? Thinking about how do you create that kind of and is it in when you're talking about the qualities of a great leader, like the with itness and that kind of idea, it's like there's something intuitive about those kind of people who, and the crazy thing about a lot of those leaders is sometimes they're very caring and loving. That's for sure. Sometimes they're like, I look at, and again, he's not a great example, but I look at the coach Bobby Knight,
Yep.
famous basketball. It's like in many ways, not a really great person and wasn't loved by anybody, but for certain people,
Yeah.
they would have done that for him.
Yep.
And you just think, what is that?
What is it? Yeah.
What is that idea that somebody would do that? And so I don't know if you want to, if you could
Yeah.
think even when you think of this example, was there something that said that's why I would have done this for
What's
him?
fascinating is I'll give you a different example. Stu Jackson, our general manager that was with
Yep.
me. Stu always receives like a lot of, there's a documentary out there that I think everyone's seen, and Stu gets a hard time over decisions that
Oh.
he's made. If you talk to any employee that was in with the Vancouver Grizzlies while he had his tenure here, all of us would have gone to bat for Stu Jackson. And I think the part of what he did is he made you feel part of the family, even though it was difficult decisions. He was present. He was always walking around, whether you're working in the ticketing office, whether you're a ball boy. He spent that time with you in different ways. And so he didn't have to be the same person to everyone. He was himself.
Right.
And then it didn't matter actually the outcome of what, of course, there's that part of his job that he has to attend to. But for
Sure.
me, I felt like I wanted to be in this building. I wanted to see him as he walked by. I babysat his twin daughters just because he asked me to one day. He was in a pinch. And that's exactly what you do for people that want to
Yeah.
take care of you. I think you're right. There's that quality, that essence of people that we need to gravitate or we want to gravitate to. And to me, that's the very essence of belonging, right?
But they make you feel like you're needed. Like we can't do this without you. And you're a ball boy, right? Listen, not to downplay that
No,
role,
100%.
but but to say that no, you are valuable here, just as valuable as Big
Yep.
Sky or what, like all of
Absolutely.
those kind of things. And I just think that's a really uh, highly prized leadership quality. And then that sense of belonging, right? We need you and you belong here. If you can make a kid, anybody that you serve, feel those two emotions, I need you and you belong here, I think it's almost limitless what you can do. But again, I say those things are easy to say. There's a lot that goes into creating that kind of culture and feelings. Again, that's why I love studying those kind of people to think, oh, and then they do those little things, right? Even when you mentioned noticing you're the general manager writing stuff on a note, while that's a small thing, like he's doing his sort of administrative job on the side in the midst of having a dinner, whatever it is, like whatever it is, there's a lot of those little nuanced kinds of things that go, oh, that's really smart, that the with itness of us has to pick up and be aware of. But no, that's awesome. Just before I let you go, I always got these 3 kind of rapid fire questions for you. First one is like on the professional learning side of things. What are you reading and or listening to today?
It's fascinating. I just picked up, actually, my son, who's in grade 11 now, volunteered at a writers festival, which is fascinating because he loves to do service. Not a huge reader, but he picked up a book for me because the author was there. And funny enough, like it was all around truth and reckoning. So the book's called The Knowing by Tanya Talaga, and it breaks down the myths inherent in Canadian history. So my son actually picked this up for me. It's the last book that I thought he would pick up. It's usually a sports related book. But he goes,
Right.
Dad, you should read this. Because while he was doing his volunteer work, not a lot of customers coming in and on a writer's festival on a dark and rainy Friday night. He started to read the book. And he goes, the first chapter, Dad, it's interesting. So can you read it? And so I thought that was
Nice.
awesome. So I have that book. And then the one I'm halfway through is Do Hard Things by Steve Magnus. And so he really provides a viewpoint on the tapping our like inner resiliency and strength in different ways. And it's more about tapping into kind of the like resiliency through understanding our body, our inner thinking and our mindset to overcome obstacles. And I find so far the book has been really good. So I think I bought it for one of my friends and it says life's hard. I think that's one of his quote.
Yeah.
Life's hard. Don't suppress it. Just embrace it. So far, so good.
Good. I like those.
Mhm.
What about just to chill? It's Friday night. That's what it is today. It's Friday. Yeah, but you don't have to. Hopefully, you can just take a little break. What's the getaway, the guilty pleasure, the mindless consumption?
Oh, right now, I think it was my wife's waiting for me to join her to watch, what was it called? The Penguin. We had to finish The Penguin
Yes.
and the new season of, oh my God, what's it called? The new season, the cowboy one, Yellowstone. Yeah. So we finished that one. So she told me, because I just came back from Chicago, she's like, I'm going to give you a day. And
Oh, you
then,
got to get caught up. Yeah.
and so
I get these mandates too.
you do, right?
You
Yeah.
got to get caught up with me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm on about episode 4 or 5 of The Penguin. So but see, that's one my wife won't watch with me. So we have to figure out the other
Figure
ones.
out the
But
other
yeah.
one. Yeah. She likes the Falcone. And I think once I like, I think I got one more episode with her and she's going to gravitate to her own shows. I think that'll be the separation will happen. But I usually have one and then I have soccer playing as well because I need to keep up to date with on my Fubu TV, what's happening in Europe. So yeah,
Yeah, and that one's I always find the soccer folks that's a bit because of the time change. Just it's like, how do you do this here? Is it just so my son-in-law dedicates Saturday mornings as his bit of a catch-up time, and then
yeah, that's
so
exactly it.
that-
Same thing.
there's some challenge. Where do you live in Surrey? Where's home? Is
Yeah,
it Surrey?
I live in Surrey, just to the side, and I live in White Rock, but I've been in Surrey my
White
entire
Rock.
life.
Yeah. So, well, White Rock's certainly a cool place. You got
Mhm.
access to the water right there. What would be some places that people should check out in White Rock? Maybe lesser known places or places like, yeah, if you go down, this would be a really good spot to check out. Whatever.
I always think of it as the artery right through Surrey. If you go down 128 is the main
Yeah.
street in the area between 80th and about 88th. And you go into any restaurant there, you will get probably the most authentic type of Indian food outside of India. And you will leave full and you'll have the nicest people. And then after that, you just go for a little walk around the block to a park and you'll
Nice.
see some of the elders in the community playing cards.
Cool.
And you sit there and just enjoy time with them. And it's like a little secret, but not so much of a secret. But some of those food places are just impeccable.
So more than just buttered chicken then.
More than butter chicken. Yeah, butter chicken's the last dish.
That's what us white folks go for because we're
Total.
scared, right?
Oh, my kids
We're
too. They
scared.
love it.
But it's nice to go with somebody that has a little authentic nose for it, can direct
sure.
point you in the right direction. Listen, JB, this was great. Great to catch up. You always have so many good stories and perspectives on this, and congratulations on all the work
Thanks.
you're doing
Appreciate
around
it.
racial
Thanks.
Surrey, and continue to do that. And let's plan to maybe grab a bite at one of those Indian restaurants one of these days.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks so much, Dean. I really appreciate always talking to you. I'm fortunate to have connected with you for so long on different ideas and look forward to the next time we get to chat in person. And yeah, I'll take you out for some good food.
Cheers.
There's that.